Oh, oops. I hit the video. I just, okay. I had meeting control. Okay. I think I'm good to go when you are.
All right, let's do it. Give it a go.
Hello, my name is Amelia Dowe and I'm a student learning advisor at the University of Tasmania. I'm going to be doing a presentation today with Jennifer Brown, who will introduce us. Oh, no, I'm going to start again. I'm sorry. Okay. What did we do last time? I introduced myself.
Yeah, we did something good last time. Yeah,
so
I think you introduce you and then
say my role.
Yeah, what your role is, and then I say, and I'm one of your, I'm a student with dyslexia and RORA, so I think that worked.
Hello, my name is Amelia Dowe and I'm a student learning advisor at the University of Tasmania. In this job, I support all students to develop their language and learning skills to succeed at university. But over the past few years, I've been working particularly with students who have dyslexia. And I'll hand over to you.
That's right. Oh, do you want to start again? No, that's
yeah. I'm sorry.
It's not your fault.
I don't know what's going on today. Okay.
And you could just say, I'm working with students in student support with students with dyslexia, which brings me to my co-host or something like that. And then I can say, oh, I'm Jen. Yeah.
Okay. That sounds good. All right. Hello, my name is Amelia Dowe and I'm a student learning advisor at the University of Tasmania. In this job, I support all students to develop their language and learning skills so they can succeed at university. But over the past few years, I've been focusing particularly on supporting students who have dyslexia, which brings me to my co-host.
Hi, my name's Jen Brown and I am a student with dyslexia and developmental learning disorder who gets support from Amelia. I'm going to be co-hosting our chat with you today.
We're going to talk about supporting undergraduates with dyslexia in higher education, and I hope it's interesting for you. Before we get started, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country though, and say that today we're meeting on Litruwita or Tasmania Aboriginal land, sea and waterways. And in the background, my Zoom background, you can see Kunyani or Mount Wellington, hopefully. We're both based in Hobart, Jen and myself, also known as Nipaluna. I'd like to acknowledge that it's a privilege to stand on country and walk in the footsteps of those before us, beneath the mountain, among the gum trees and waterways that continue to run through the veins of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status, and to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community that continue to care for country. I recognise a history of truth which acknowledges the impacts of invasion and colonisation upon Aboriginal people, resulting in the genocide and forcible removal from their lands. We stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history, and a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. If you would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where you are as well, that would be really wonderful. Our talk today is going to be divided into 3 sections. Firstly, I'm going to speak about some of the common issues that I see coming through with students who I work with. And then Jen will speak about some ideas for better supporting students in general in higher education. And then we'll share some reflections on working towards change. So as we get started, actually, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this image that I've got in the background. So there's a picture of all different succulents. Oh, some of them are quite similar, but they're all growing in a whole lot of different ways. And I just think it's always nice to have this idea of diversity, within diversity whenever we're talking about anything. So I'm speaking about common issues, but there'll be different impacts for everybody. Everyone's going to be slightly different. So it's not like everything I'm saying is going to apply to everyone, but these are just some of the common issues that might present themselves or might not. So the first one, first common issue is around diagnosis, and this will be familiar to many people. Often people are uncertain about their diagnosis. They're maybe not sure, have a feeling that something's going on for them, and they're not quite sure what the cause of it is. They might have had trouble accessing testing, and there can be many reasons for this. It might be to do with the cost of it, the time that it takes, the availability. And sometimes one of those barriers to testing is the actual experience of testing itself. It's not always, it can be quite a confronting thing to go through, even if in the end the diagnosis is really helpful. And just sort of acknowledging that there can be really a lot of social and emotional implications with diagnosis. So this really impacts whether or not students are coming forward for getting support or being aware of the sort of support that they might have available to them. The next issue I often see is related to stereotypes. And these stereotypes might be held by peers, by other students or staff, and some of the assumptions that people make. So this can be related to what a student can or can't do, what their strengths might be, and really can often be a misunderstanding of a condition, of the condition and its impacts. I think for many people, there's a stereotype that dyslexia is just related to spelling, and that if you can spell okay, everything's all right, or that you're never going to be able to do that, as in that maybe you can't learn how to do it, if people can learn these things. And also that leads to an underestimation of, or a misunderstanding of some of those other impacts, perhaps related to working memory and planning, constructing longer pieces of writing. I find there's often a focus on reading rather than the impacts on writing. And there can often be quite a deficit-based outlook for many people, really ignoring like the huge constellation of strengths that students bring with them to their study and to life in general, I think. It's really important to remember as well, there's such a complexity in individual situations, and sometimes this also can be overlooked when someone is thinking about what dyslexia is and what sort of impacts it might have on their study, or what it might mean to be doing group work with someone who has dyslexia. It's really important to understand the situation of the individual and what it means to that person. I've often found that when a student might be referred to me from the accessibility team, on paper, a couple of students might look really similar. So maybe they have a similar diagnosis and similar outcomes on some of the testing that they've done, but the impacts on their life and their study can be completely different. So it's really about taking every person and their experience and speaking with them and really understanding what's going on. So there can also be a gap in the services. Now, this is something that we've been working at a fair bit at the University of Tasmania, and I'm sure other universities are as well. And it's related to the scope of our support roles. So there are learning advisors, such as myself, at all the universities, and we focus on language and learning. And likewise, there are disability and accessibility advisors at all the universities. But there's often a bit of a gap there when it comes to learning support or some of the more specialised aspects of it. That learning advisors often don't have that training or experience in working with students with specific learning differences. And likewise, whilst accessibility and disability advisors have a huge amount of knowledge and experience working with students with these conditions, they don't necessarily have the skills, or even if they do, the time to work with individual students to really develop the skills they need to succeed at university. And I think a lot of this can lead to some staff lack of confidence. And I think this is something definitely something that I experienced several years ago when starting to work with more students who have dyslexia. just feeling like you don't have the knowledge and understanding that you need. It can be quite difficult to access training to skill up in this area and really understand what you need to be doing. I have found though that as a learning advisor with a background in language development, actually there's quite a lot of crossover in our skill set. And so with just that little bit of training and awareness, we can make a big difference, and we can, I think, move really effectively to work in this space once we understand what we need to do. And this lack of confidence and lack of training can also lead to just less inclusive practices in general, not just for learning advisors, but I think for support staff and probably teaching staff in general. So for example, with formatting of documents, not really understanding the implications of sending out an unstructured Word document, that kind of thing. Some of those things are really nice and easy to fix. So a little bit of awareness can go a long way. So all of these things add up to mean that the support that students get is often not timely. So I've sort of spoken about a few things, like they probably all seem a little bit disparate and very kind of general issues about diagnosis, stereotypes, lack of confidence in staff. But all of those things add up to sort of add to what I see as one of the biggest issues, that students aren't getting support in a timely manner, whether it's through lack of awareness, whether it's through fear of stigma, that kind of thing. So it means that often it's a crisis that leads to students seeking support. Yeah, they might not be aware of services and they might be afraid. And it's really not what we like to see. I don't like to, I hate to think that students have to wait for some kind of crisis as their catalyst for getting support, you know, partway through their, you know, like second year or towards the end of their first semester when it looks like they're going to fail. Really, we'd like to be able to get to students early and give them the support that they need. I think once you, like just reflecting on the students that I have been able to see early, nice and early in semester, it's just really nice to see things going smoothly and getting through those assignments and other assessment items with a lot less stress, which is what we really want to see. I'm going to hand over to Jen now to speak about some ideas for supporting students.
Cool, thanks, Amelia. And I'll just make a point that Amelia's controlling the PowerPoint, so it might not always match as I talk, but it should all be there. All right, so in my ideal world for neurodiverse students, we would see our universities moving towards a holistic model where neurodiversity is normalised. This means starting by acknowledging the existence of neurodiversity in our institution and doing our utmost to highlight the strengths that our neurodiverse individuals bring and building an inclusive institutional culture. This can start with a simple rebranding by the university where they outwardly and proudly advertise themselves as neurodiverse. And then this is backed up with supportive resources that develop an inclusive institutional culture that ensures it meets the needs of people with learning disabilities. So importantly, to do this, universities need to have a suite of tools in a package, which includes work on early awareness and increasing opportunities for neurodiverse students, as well as normalising neurodiversity and supporting staff. So I'm going to talk about what do some of these tools look like in reality. So on our next slide, it would start with some early awareness raising in high schools. Universities could establish an ongoing relationship with high schools where they work closely with schools to identify students that have different learning needs and identifying students that have those needs that might be interested in university. joint university and high school staff can prepare these students for life at their neurodiverse inclusive university, get students ready to declare that they've got different learning needs, and importantly, teach students and encourage them not to be afraid to enroll at university. Like me, there are so many students out there with different learning styles that can achieve really great things at university, but often they don't even think that uni is even an option for them. So starting early to really encourage people is important. Another opportunity is at the university open days or visiting high schools. Universities can bring along their inclusive neurodiverse branding and list the resources that they have on offer to assist students, and talk about those. I'll talk about those in a minute, but they can talk about these with the students as part of, just any old open day opportunity. Another tool is in the enrolment package. So this is an opportunity for what I call an early screening tool to capture students with different learning needs. And this is another point to offer an opportunity to help a student feel supported as well, and acknowledge that they might learn differently, and to discuss whether or not they've had a formal diagnosis. So it might include the enrolment form having a series of questions in it that asks about the student's learning needs. And these could be targeted with some questions that are really about, dyslexia, that might pick up on the fact that students are doing things differently. The enrolment package might also list the available resources and ask students to consider if they'd like to access these resources. So getting in early there to offer early support and acknowledgement. And if we do this, a student feels included and accepted early on, and they're probably less likely to have a crisis later because they've already started university with that support. Okay, so another important tool is offering the opportunity for testing for dyslexia or for other learning disabilities. So offering this within the university, I think, is really important. It's important because it's really difficult as an adult to get tested right now in Australia, and it's very expensive, and that's a huge barrier for people. So one way to do this testing in universities is to use psychology or speech pathology staff and students to perform the testing. So this model is co-beneficial for students with learning needs and for students wishing to become psychologists or speech pathologists. It's an opportunity to do research and early career engagement for those speech pathology students, but it's also an opportunity for students with learning difficulties to have a test in a familiar environment where they feel comfortable and have a cost-effective test. But of course, this testing should be coupled with an opportunity for mental health support once a student gets their result. I know for me, getting the result of my dyslexia testing was both a relief and a burden. It was a real eye-opener and explained a lot about what I did and why I did the things the way I did. So in some ways it was a relief, but it was also a really huge point of anxiety. I wondered, what does it mean for my academic career? And what are my colleagues and peers and everyone going to think of me? How am I going to tell people about this result? How even should I feel about it? Does anyone actually understand? Do my peers and colleagues, are they going to understand what this means? And really the biggest thing I was worried about was, am I going to be a burden for my supervisors? So our university package should include support with mental health and other types of information on options that are available. And this actually could include just letting people know where they can go to get some speech therapy or other assistance if they need it, and what is the best way to discuss all of this new information with lecturers and supervisors. And this brings me to my next tool, which is to ensure we have a really good inclusive peer support package. ensuring lecturers, staff, and other students at the university are supported to know more about neurodiversity and how people learn differently. The branding and stuff at the university is obviously going to help with this, but I think it's important to give staff tools so they can really understand what is dyslexia and how is the brain working differently, and knowing that dyslexic students code differently, and what is the diversity in learning needs for dyslexic students. So staff should be able to clearly understand how the student is neurodiverse and what it means for that student, and then really importantly, how to play to the strengths that the student has. Lecturers need to be able to access courses to do this, and they need information. And another way of doing this is to attach information to learning access plans that students have. So explaining to the lecturers some simple things about what this plan is, why it is based on this diagnosis, what the diagnosis means for the student, and what are the strengths that the student has. One thing, staff should never ever feel like a learning access plan is a drag on their time, or they have fear and not know how to deal with the learning access plans, which is something that I think happens a little bit at the moment, just because of that lack of understanding of what dyslexia is. So offering training, clear information and support for staff is obviously a super important tool for success for people like myself. And finally, in our tool bag, I just wanted to discuss the direct resources for students with learning disabilities. So here, having software and technology is sometimes, is actually often touted as one of the most important things to support students with a disability, learning disability. So making sure that that technology is available and easy to access at the university. However, so in my case, it was one of the most important, it was one of the things that was first offered to me, and coincides with a learning access plan and making sure that student has extra time on their exams and extra time to get assignments in, or access to technology during assessments and those sorts of things. They're often wrapped up in a package. But for me, I found that these things were actually really a bare minimum requirement and not necessarily the most important thing for what I needed. And what I needed was a sense of inclusiveness, a supportive learning environment, and having access to some important resources. So of course, everyone takes to technology differently and everyone's learning needs are different, but this is really important. Technology isn't always going to be the #1 best option for everyone. So for me, having access to people like Amelia in learning support services that I can sit with, and she has time to sit with me and discuss ways to improve my writing and my speaking, and to acknowledge my specific learning differences, and talking about the resources I can access. And that actually included just accessing books, believe it or not, that talked about academic life with dyslexia, making a plan, having regular sessions with her to discuss my writing were all really important. And then technology was finally the least important thing for me. So it's about putting the human resources in place to support every single student with a learning disability at the university, and not expecting technology to do that job. Extra human resources are actually sometimes really hard for universities to commit to. But I do believe it's the true difference between becoming an inclusive university for neurodiverse students and seeing them achieve. And ultimately, this is going to be worth the investment for the university, because it's going to increase graduations and enrollments from neurodiverse students. Cool. So our next section is, or our final section is working towards change. So we were asked to offer our top priority for change. And I think for me, it is the human resources, as I mentioned. But as part of this, I think it's really important for universities to be constantly asking themselves, are they doing enough to fulfill their responsibility to support all students with disability under discrimination law, and to be constantly considering ways to make sure that this is happening? So in having this discussion, Amelia and I got thinking about this issue, and we were discussing differences in resourcing between the United Kingdom and Australia for students at university with dyslexia. And we wondered if the laws were different at all. And we did a little comparison, and we actually discovered that they're actually quite similarly worded. So while we're not experts in discrimination law, it did lead us to wonder if, in fact, in Australia, we're simply taking a narrow interpretation of the law and what it says, and they're taking a broader interpretation in the United Kingdom. And what this translates to is different levels of resourcing for students between the two states. The two nation states, the two countries. And so Amelia will just talk a little bit about some of those differences from her perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. So I guess from my perspective, I was talking earlier about always trying to upskill and learn as much as I can. And I found that one of my key reference points is the UK and the training and resources available there, the types of roles in the universities, like the dyslexia tutor roles that are at the universities over there, and really trying to learn as much as possible about how all of that operates, which has, of course, led to wondering how we can sort of change the situation here in Australia so that there is more comprehensive resourcing of these types of roles might exist. Obviously in a way that suits Australia, because the environment is quite different, but how can we do something like this? Yes, so any of the professional development I've done has been through there. There is, of course, professional development available in Australia, but it tends to focus on the earlier stages of education. Yeah, so which led to us thinking more about this. And I do wonder as well if there's aspect of cultural environment as well, related to neurodiversity in general. These are quite big questions, but yeah, I'll be interested to keep thinking about this and noticing what might be happening. I know in this conference there is a whole stream on policy, so that's probably a good place to be learning about what the experts say on this. But really, in a nutshell, if we're thinking about change, it's trying to think about that structure and the overall environment, and how we can shift things, what might lead to those changes. So yeah, that's hopefully we can continue to work towards that. I know a lot of people are, including everyone involved with the dyslexic. So that brings us to the end of our presentation today. Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be part of this conference. We'd love any feedback or questions, and you're very welcome to email either of us. My email address is amelia.dowe@utas.edu.au, and Jen's is jennifer.brown@utas.edu.au. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.